Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. I'm TCaptainX. Today we're going to be covering the best graphic settings to help you guys get faster FPS, but without sacrificing visual quality. That way you guys can have improved visibility and see enemies better. I'm going to show you some tips on how to make your game just look more vibrant and kind of more like pleasing to the eye, and also reduce any extra latency you might have to give you the best competitive performance that you can get. Now, I do want to start out and say that I have a very high-end PC, and I definitely cannot guarantee you're going to get the same results as I'm getting. I do have a 4090 GPU and a 13900KS CPU, so some of this stuff is going to vary, and we're going to talk through what settings might change depending on your setup. If you do own MW3, the multiplayer version, I'd recommend running this benchmark at first to kind of get an idea of where you are, and you do this by going into private match in multiplayer, and then there's a thing that says run benchmark, and keep note of what your bottleneck is on your CPU and your GPU, because we're going to discuss why that's important later. So we're going to start off with the display settings for graphics here. So first of all, display mode. For the absolute best performance, full screen exclusive is going to be your best bet, especially for reducing any latency. If you have multiple monitors and you like to go between them and you're not like a super ultra competitive player, full screen borderless is probably fine. You probably won't notice the difference, but exclusive is your best for less latency. Display monitor is just whatever your monitor is. Display adapter is whatever your GPU is. So it only need to change if you have more than one GPU in your PC for some reason. For refresh rate, whatever the highest one available is what you're going to want to check. I'll show you guys how to double check it's set correct in your PC itself as well. Display resolution is whatever your highest one available is probably what you want to be. I'm on a standard 16:9 1440p monitor, so it's going to look like this. If you're on a normal 1080, it's going to be 1920 by 1080. Now, if you're on like an ultra wide monitor, like not a standard shape or size monitor, it might not be your 16:9. Automatic should pick it up, but you might want to look up your monitor specs to know what your aspect ratio is, just so you get that correct. For the display gamma, if you're on a PC monitor, it should be 2.2, but if you were playing on a TV, especially if you're on console, then you would be on 2.4. For brightness, I recommend turning this up just a little bit from the default 50. I like to do 55, but you could absolutely go even a little bit higher to 60, and this is going to help you see in some of those dark corners just a little bit. Scrolling down here, so Nvidia Reflex Low Latency. This is the one that matters when it comes to that CPU bound or GPU bound thing that I pointed out in the benchmark. If you are GPU bound, which I am myself, and the majority of you guys probably are, you're going to set this to on. If you're CPU bound though, you would do on plus boost. And FYI, if you have an AMD card, you won't have this option at all. Now, what this does is basically it's Nvidia technology. It's going to help reduce any latency on the system. To figure this out, one, you can run that benchmark, but if you do not own MW3 multiplayer and you can't run that benchmark, another thing you can do is go to your interface settings, go down here to your telemetry, hit show more, and turn on your GPU card time and your processor CPU time. Now, you're going to need to do this in game because this is not accurate in the menu here, but whichever one is higher in game is what you're bound to. So based off this, it looks like I'm CPU bound, but in the game, my GPU tends to be even or just 1 millisecond higher actually than my CPU. So that would be a GPU bound case. So there are some eco mode presets, which are meant to kind of like save power. I have mine set as custom, and I just have everything changed individually here. For VSync gameplay and menus, I have both of these off. VSync usually leads to a lot of screen tearing and latency issues. However, if you are experiencing a lot of screen tearing, you could try to turn this on, but just know there probably will be some unwanted latency or delay if you do use VSync. For the custom frame rate limit, in reality, I should probably set this to custom, and I should probably leave this at 240 because I have a 240 hertz monitor. So there's not really much of a point of me going over that. I had it on unlimited because I wanted to test my FPS and go beyond that. Now, when I'm in the menus or if I'm out of focus, which means I'm tabbed out, I have my FPS way down because I don't need 200 FPS when I'm in the menu. It's just no point. We let that time and use our GPU and CPU to kind of cool down during that time. Focus mode is a weird setting. It creates like a blurry kind of black edge around the edge of the screen when you turn it up. And I think it's maybe like a visual thing to help people focus on the center of the screen. I recommend leaving this all the way off at 0. HDR also, you're going to want to leave that off in terms of performance, and we're going to kind of adjust some of the color stuff later. Now, moving on to the quality tab here. So I have mine set to custom. As soon as you change anything, it's going to go from one of these and change into custom. For your render resolution, just leave this at 100. There's really no reason to turn this down or up because of other settings that we're going to adjust because of that. So dynamic resolution is an interesting setting. I would only recommend using this if you're on a very low end PC. Basically what it does is it will scale down your resolution when the PC is like overworking and it's trying to kind of boost your FPS to what you have it set. I I really don't recommend using this because the upscaling and sharpening features are generally better options than the dynamic resolution. Assuming you're on an average to good PC, the majority of you guys are going to want to use Fidelity FX CAS, because what this does is it's going to make your game just look a lot sharper, a lot more crisp, with very minimal to no FPS drops. As far as the strength goes, completely personal preference. You might see slightly more FPS drops if you crank this to 100. I'm on 75. This is completely personal preference. So now, if you are on a really low end PC and you are struggling for frames, you could try doing Nvidia DLSS if you have a Nvidia card, and if you have an AMD card, AMD FSR 2.1. This, however, both of these cause a lot of latency. Yes, you will get more FPS. It's not going to feel like you're getting more FPS. It's just going to say you are up in the top corner there. So really, I recommend avoiding that and probably just sticking to Fidelity FX CAS. Path tracing and ray reconstruction. If you're playing campaign, you want your game to look super cool, turn it on. But if you're at all a competitive player, make sure this thing is turned off. VRAM. Okay, VRAM is kind of a confusing one, and hopefully I explained this decently. A lot of people like to just crank this sucker all the way to 90 and they're like, yeah, more VRAM, dude. That's not always a good thing, because it'll likely lead to more 1% lows or more like stuttering and hitching. Even on my PC, I experienced that just a little bit more. So I've benchmarked every different setting. 70 actually worked the best for me. I'm gonna assume most people are going to do better between 50 and 70. If you can, run the benchmark or just try to get a feel, but you're probably not gonna wanna be on 80 or 90. This setting is hard to explain because every setting and setup is going to be different depending on what your specs are. Variable rate shading is a newer setting, I believe, to Call of Duty this year, and it's very, very good. Make sure this is turned on. From what I understand, what it does is the center of your screen gets priority in terms of rendering and FPS and things like that, and the very edges are slightly decreased in terms of priority of getting like rendering. So you're basically going to have a sharper, clearer picture of that kind of center, and it's actually going to help your FPS. So I would recommend turning this one on. Scrolling down here into details and textures. For like 90% of you guys, I'm going to recommend low. Very low looks like crap. It looks like Play-Doh, and I would only recommend that if you're on a ultra low end PC. Most people, low looks way better and has much better FPS performance. The only reason I play normal is because I have a very high end PC, and my low 1% are literally better than what my monitor max refresh rate even is. So I might as well boost my visual quality because it basically doesn't matter for me. I don't recommend high unless you're playing like campaign, you want the game to look super good, but normal to high, the difference is minimal, but normal FPS wise gets a very big benefit. Texture filter and anisotropy. This has to do with like looking things at an angle. There's not much of an FPS difference here. Honestly, I could probably go to high, but I've just got mine on normal just because what I've always run it. But again, low if you're on a super low end PC, but probably normal if you're anyone else. Depth of field, make sure you turn this off. This gives this weird blur effect when you zoom your gun. It is just not good for being able to see enemies. Detail quality level has to do with like the bushes and the trees and the grass. It's not very important, so I have that turned low because we're just gonna get more FPS out of it. Particle resolution, this has to do with explosions here, and I'm gonna actually move my camera over so that you guys can see that a little bit better. So on low, you see much less sparks. On high, you see a lot more sparks. You can go to very low if you wanted to. That's gonna be your best for absolute performance. I have mine on low. It's not much of a difference FPS wise from what I can tell, but that's how I am. Bullet impacts really has nothing to do with FPS. It just shows the holes in the wall when you're shooting it. I like to leave it on because if I'm looking at recoil patterns or something like that. Persistent effects is kind of similar to particle resolution in that it has to do with explosions and stuff. I leave that off because I just don't see the benefit in having long lasting explosion effects in the game. Shader quality is a very important one when it comes to FPS. High does look really good and really pretty. If you're playing campaign, go for it, but you're gonna wanna go low because it is a pretty big effect when it comes to your FPS. On-demand texture streaming will actually try to actively download textures onto your PC so that you can render things at a like higher level. I don't think this is good at all for competitive purposes. If you're playing campaign, again, turn it on, but for better performance, just leave this off. There's not that much of a difference from what I can tell in terms of visual quality either. Local texture streaming quality though, this one I feel like did make the game look better, and I noticed no FPS drops when I did this. If you are again on a super low end PC, feel free to turn this down to low though. Shadow and lighting is another very important area just because shadows tend to be one of the biggest things that has to do with your performance in FPS. Now, when it comes from very low to normal, yes, you will gain a few more FPS on very low, but shadows start to look really wonky and bad here. If you can see how like blurry and edge they are versus how crisp they are here. When we go to normal, they look pretty close to how they are on Ultra, but way less FPS. So I play normal. Again, lower end PCs, low or very low is what you're going to want to play with. Screen space shadows has to do with the shadows from your gun or your character. So I like to leave mine on low, just that way I can see, because I believe this has to interact with if there's an enemy standing above you and they're making a shadow. If it's off, I don't think you will see that shadow from what I can tell. So I like to keep it on low that way, because there's been times where somebody's above me and I see their shadow, and that's how I know they're there. So that's why I like to leave it on low. Ambient occlusion has to do with kind of like other shadowing. Like you can look at the under the wheel here, how the shadows are. Not really big in terms of helping you see better. I actually think you can see better with it off anyway. So this should help you see better in dark corners. Screen space reflections, again, it's really pretty, but not going to really help you in terms of performance wise. So we're going to leave that off. And then the static reflection quality is another thing that has to do with the mirrors here. Again, it looks pretty, but not going to help you FPS wise. So we're going to leave that to low. And then going down to the environment here, tessellation has to do with how, if you look here, like at this little mound of dirt, how it's raised versus the low or off, it's like flat. So it helps kind of those like natural surfaces of like brick walls and stuff like that. I have mine set to near. So if I'm right up by it, it doesn't look like Play-Doh, but it's not trying to render it super far from all. Again, for max performance, just leave it off, but I have mine set to near because it makes the game look just a little bit better without much of an FPS hit. Volumetric quality, make sure you leave this off. This will make things like seeing through the fog and lighting a little bit easier. This is with on high, you can see those kind of light particles shine through a little bit more, whereas over here, it's just like a normal clear picture. Deferred physics quality, and then weather grid and water quality, we're going to leave all of these off. Again, these all look really pretty, but they're only going to hurt our FPS, and they're not going to help us see enemies better either with any of these on. Moving on to the view tab, which is the final tab of graphics. So field of view is going to be a bit subjective here. I do play on the maximum of 120, but do keep note that when you play above about 100, you can start to see some FPS hits and decrease to your performance when you go above 100. If you're used to playing on console back in the day in Warzone 1, you might want to stick with about 100 to 110 until you get more used to it. But me, I like to have 120 because I get a wider field of view and I can see around me much easier and pick up enemies on the very edges of my screen. With ADS field of view, most of you guys are going to want to run affected because this is going to keep that field of view wide even when you aim your gun. Independent will bring that zoom way in only when you zoom your gun. It does have some benefits. If you struggle seeing people at a distance, you could try independent, but you will have more visual recoil on independent, whereas affected will make that recoil seem like it is less because of that wider field of view. For the weapon field of view, I also use wide simply because this is going to push that gun farther away and it's going to take up less of your screen, allow you to see enemies more in front of you when you have that gun down in front of you. Third person, there really is no third person in this game except zombies, but I have it to the max. Vehicle field of view, same thing. I'm going with wide so I can see things wider around me if I am in a vehicle. For camera, make sure your motion blurs are off. This is not going to help you see enemies. It's going to make it much harder. Same with film grain. You're going to want to turn this off. This is just like a cinematic effect. It makes the green look kind of blurry and grainy. Not even sure why it's a setting, to be honest. For all the movements, make sure these are on least. This is going to reduce any unnecessary shaking of your camera. Spectator camera, make sure this is on game, unless you like the helmet one, but the helmet camera is kind of weird in my opinion. You can also invert your flashbang if you want it to be your screen go black instead of white so you don't get blinded when you're playing at 3 a.m. in the morning, but I just leave mine off because I like getting blinded at 3 a.m. in the morning. Now after graphics, I am going to go into the interface tab here because I do want to show a few things. I would recommend you turn subtitles off unless you like them for multiplayer. That way they're not taking up your screen and you're in your way at all like that. When we come down to color customization though here, this is something that you can do to make your game kind of pop and look a little bit better. So on my mini map, I actually have my enemies set to this pink color. So I have my palette to custom, and then mine is this kind of pinkish purple color. I just think it's a little bit easier to see than the red. There's nothing wrong with red. This is totally personal preference. I've seen some people set it as green because it stands out more to them. Again, totally personal preference there on that one. Now, when it comes to the color filter settings though, I do recommend going to filter 2. This is the colorblind setting, but it just makes the game look more vibrant and prettier. I feel like you can see in dark areas a little bit better as well. Change your target to both, and then also your intensity to 100 for both of those. And the game should look a little bit more vibrant and pretty. Going down to your HUD bounds, you can crank this in a bunch. And what that will do is going to bring things like your minimap in closer to your screen so you don't have to look so far. Mine's brought in just slightly and I like it the way it is, so I'm not going to mess with it. But that is a good option to bring these in just so you can see a little bit better there. Minimap shape, make sure this is on square. Square actually allows you to see larger than circle if you have it set on there. Recommend turning the minimap rotation and horizontal compass on. For your crosshairs, I do like playing with the center dot on and the center dot as largest. It just helps me with my centering as I'm walking around and aiming. I like to have that larger center dot, but it's totally personal preference there. A few other settings here to cover really quick just to show you guys. For my telemetry, this is what I use, totally personal preference. I'd recommend you just leave these first 3 on at least. That way you know your FPS, any latency, and packet loss if you're having any issues there. And then just to round out there is the rest of my interface settings as well. So go ahead and close the game, and we're actually going to open up our documents file. So go to your documents and go to Call of Duty. Double click on that, go to players, and then it should be the first one. It's options.4.cod23. Open up that. If a prompt comes up and it asks you what to open it, just do it with Notepad here. And where there's a few things we can change in the game config files that it doesn't allow you to change in the game settings here. The first one is going to be the renderer worker count. And this is going to depend on your CPU here. So generally what you're going to be doing here is you're going to do this for the number of cores that your CPU has, not the number of threads. So look up your CPU. So if you have like an Intel i7 7700 or something like that, look it up and it'll tell you on the manufacturer website the amount of cores, and you're going to put it as right here. Now, I have an Intel i9-13900KS. The newer Intel CPUs are a little bit weird because their first performance core is labeled as P0. They technically have P1 through 7. You're probably fine to run with 8 here, but I've been told by some people that 7 might technically be better. I don't really notice the difference in performance from 7 to 8, but I just wanted to throw that out there because I know somebody's going to ask, why are you on 7? So to find some of these, something you can do is you can just hit Control F and then you can type it in. So one thing you can do is type in blood here. And for this first one here, this show blood effects, if you change this from true to false, it will actually decrease the amount of like blood splatter that pops up on your screen here. And it is nice because it's less kind of visual clutter when you're trying to shoot at someone. You can also just below here at show brass, you can change that to false because when guns are shooting at the shells, you can turn that off. So again, it's less visual clutter. Next, type in cascade, and this one that is sun shadow cascade. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to copy this here exactly. So Control C and then Control V, paste it into this area. And this is going to help to do with the shadows. And you're going to see really no change much in terms of your shadow quality, but you should get a pretty big bump in your FPS. Now, another thing you can do is start to type in resize. So I have like resiz here. I've heard, I might speak incorrectly on this. I've heard from several people that if you are on an Intel CPU with your resizable bar, you want to turn this off. So you can do this in the config files by turning this to false. Now, other people have said you have to go into your BIOS and do this, but I was told, no, that's not true. You can leave it on in your BIOS and just turn it off in the game only. So you might want to do a little bit more research on that if you feel like it, but I have this off and my games are running great. So when you're done with all that, just make sure you do Control Save and then exit out. If you have a Nvidia GPU, right click on your monitor and open your Nvidia control panel here. And I will show you a few things that help a lot when it comes to visibility here. Now, really quick here, just double check here. Make sure you have this set to use the advanced 3D and that you also check this and pulls over to performance here. In your manage 3D settings, I'm not going to go through and try to explain all these and act like I know what every single one of these does, like to great detail, because I don't. I will just scroll through here and feel free to look at these. I have had these recommended by some other people that are a lot smarter than me when it comes to PC. So that's what I have, but I can't guarantee it'll be the same because it might be a little bit different depending on your specs and hardware here. Now, go down to your change resolution here and make sure for your monitor that is set to the correct resolution, but make sure the refresh rate is set to the highest that it can go here. I've seen a lot of people will get like a brand new monitor and it's like a 240 hertz monitor and they have it set to 60 and didn't even know. So just make sure that is there. My second monitor doesn't really matter because it's not my gaming monitor there. Moving down to the desktop color settings here. This one is very important. And this one I really recommend with digital vibrance, turning this up at least some. I would say try going up to about 75%. I play at 85 and I used to play as high as 100 when I exclusively played Ashika because of how just gray and dull that map is. This just basically makes colors pop more, but it also makes blacks not as dark from what I can tell. And I feel like I see a decent amount better in darker areas from turning that digital vibrance setting up there. Then you go down to your adjust video color settings. configs here and click on the with Nvidia settings, click on advanced, and then make sure the dynamic range is set to full and not limited. And you should get like a wider color spectrum with that. Another thing too that a lot of people forget about doing, and I can't really show this, but if you go onto your monitor itself or your TV, if you're a console player playing on TV, don't forget that you can adjust your saturation, brightness, contrast, all that in there. So this is a really good tip, especially for console players that can't go in and change all these crazy settings that we have access to on PC, is change the saturation, bring your saturation up a bit, bring your brightness up a bit, and that could definitely help with visibility a lot as well. A few other things I want to say before I wrap up here. I have had my PC overclocked and optimized by someone. The person that I've worked with several times now, his name is Papa Season, and I will link his Twitter and stuff. He's been great to work with so far. I'm not paid to say this by any reason, something like that, but I just had my PC optimized and overclocked by him. You know, if you're tech savvy, you're good with it, go for it, do it yourself. But he did a lot of different things and just made my PC just run way smoother. Also helped with some streaming issues I was having with my streaming PC, also helped with my internet. So he was just a good guy that I would vouch for and recommend. The other thing is I do have a Paradox Customs PC. Again, I am not paid to say this. They are technically a team sponsor of the team I'm on, but they've just been great to work with. I've been really happy with that PC. So if you are looking for a new PC, I would absolutely vouch for them as well. And then the third person I want to kind of shout out is Art is War. If you guys know Art, he is responsible for the awesome custom audio tune that's going around in Warzone. He also, I know, just released a custom filters video that allows you to put a color filter on your monitor, and it makes colors pop even more than that digital vibrancy tip that I talked about. So definitely check that out if you want to play even more around with brighter filters and things like that. But otherwise, guys, let me know if you have questions. Hopefully this video helped. Another quick shout out, I apologize. I did pick up a few config file tips from 4Eyes on YouTube. He's made several good graphic settings videos that I've referred to and has helped for myself. So shout out to him as well. And hopefully that wraps it up. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you in the next one.